Those Who Do the Podcast will begin after this short message.
Hey, it's good old boy Mike.
This is good old boy Dave.
From Sips, Suds, and Smokes. Sips, Suds, and Smokes covers wine, tea, coffee, distilled spirits, whiskey, scotch, beer, cigars.
People whose first name starts with Q.
Bad fake British accents.
And we always take time to make fun of the people of Alabama.
Banned once again.
It's a 1-hour episode that's mildly entertaining for about 22 minutes.
I think mildly would be a vast improvement.
Well, we do have the only beer show with the Holy Man. We talk about these products and rate them with our unique rating system, like our Suds 5 rating. Do you really have something better to do with your life for an hour than actually listen to this show?
Well, don't make them think about it.
Well, join us on this radio station, podcast network, or via our Android app.
Welcome to this episode of Those Who Do the podcast that explores people, their hobbies, their interests, and their lives. With you, as always, I'm Zach. This week is a special week for me because I have one of my oldest friends in the world that has proven that despite being friends with me, you can still be massively successful in a field that takes lots of work, lots of determination, and the smarts. Look, man, here's the thing. I know it sounds like fancier if I say, so today with us, we have Lillian Erdahl. I can't do it, man.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
It would feel weird.
Yeah, I can't do it. So I have Lily. I have Lily Erdahl here with me, and we've been friends for 22 years. That's nuts, isn't it?
That is nuts.
That is
I think
nuts.
It's more than 22.
Well, so... yeah, it would be more than
Right?
22.
It's like
Yeah, because it would have been like 90.
4 years.
Yeah,
1998.
Yeah, because you were a year behind me, right?
Yeah, 1998 in the towers.
Yes,
Which, by the way, we broke them. They're now demolished. Just so you understand how real it is when he says it's dangerous.
Yeah, it's gone. The ones that we lived in are gone. I think the Commons is still there, though,
Yeah,
which
I
is
know they
weird.
kept some of it, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think they use it for storage.
They demolished our dorm.
Yeah, I didn't know it happened, and then I found out about it, and then I went back and watched the video of them imploding them, and it was like I got a little weepy.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like
Because you met me there. I
yeah,
get it.
that was it. That was all. It all went back to just that moment. So and it's a testament to like humanity, and I'm sure we'll get into it at some point when we get a little further into the story of you and your life. But we didn't really have a lot in common. We were very, very different people. I was like a scourge of humanity. Like I was a mess in college. And Lily was a very nice, squared away, polite, congenial, regularly attended church, all of the things I was not, but somehow we became friends.
I think that was my freshman year, though, that I attended church, for the record.
Well, I mean, you did live in a rectory one summer.
I did live in the rectory one summer, but that was not because I'm so religious. That was because it was cheap rent and a good location.
I do specifically remember the look on your face. We were going to, I don't remember, I think it was 4th of July. I think we were going to see fireworks. And I stopped there to pick you up, and there was a group of people. I think they were your friends. I don't think I knew any of them. And I stopped to pick you up. They also met us there. And we were talking about something. You introduced me as being a comic or something. And I made some offhanded comment about being from Waterloo and how the tornadoes never hit Waterloo because we put trailer parks around the outside of them to trick the tornadoes away. And one of the people with us was like, oh man, I heard a comedian tell that joke once. And we're standing right outside your door, and the rector goes, "Son of a bitch!" And you turn, like, all the color drained from your face, and I'm like, "I'm so sorry."
I was like, "Where's the priest? Just don't say it in front of the priest because he might kick me out, and I don't have any place else to live." That's really what that was.
I'm so sorry. I forgot where I was. I don't know. And then
you can't swear in front of the rectory, Zach. God will see you.
To make the story abridged, it turns out that the comic that this person saw do the joke was me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was yeah. I was in a car in a funeral procession with a priest once, and a car pulled out in front of the procession, and he goes, "Dumb son of a bitch." And I was like,
there you go. See?
Okay, all right.
Even the priests swear sometimes.
Sometimes, apparently, when the worst things happen, traffic.
Oh my gosh, traffic is the worst.
But
that's why I live in Iowa.
Yeah, man, I tell you. It's funny when I talk to my buddies from California, because I'm like, yeah, traffic's a little crazy today. There's 4 cars in front of me. There's no, even like Des Moines has a rush minute.
Yeah.
It's not even a full rush hour. It's like a 15-minute window where there might be more cars on the road.
Yeah. When I lived in Pennsylvania, if you were trying to drive from Pennsylvania to New Jersey through Philly, there's this interstate called the Schuylkill Expressway. And the Schuylkill turns into a parking lot on like Friday evenings.
Is that someone's name?
Schuylkill. Yeah.
How unfortunate junior high school.
I don't remember how to spell it. It has way too many weird letters in it, but yeah.
So did you know that the bridge that melted in Pennsylvania when that truck blew up underneath it last summer? Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
I think it was I-95. Would that be right?
Probably.
In Philadelphia. So that happened 4 hours after I drove over it.
Oh, that's scary.
We took that to the airport and flew out, and then later that day, the whole bridge melted. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, I hadn't driven on it in a long time, but I remember when the I-35 in Minneapolis collapsed.
Oh yeah,
thinking like, oh, I've been on that interstate. That sounds scary.
My buddy Tim was supposed to be. I can't remember how he told the story. He was supposed to be on there that day, but instead was somewhere with his dad.
Yeah.
So like, it's just weird how things work out, which I guess you'd call that serendipity, which kind of seems to be a through line in this particular podcast. We hear a lot about serendipity because I have yet to talk to anybody who's a failure at life. So.
Well, that's because you get to pick the people you interview.
Right. I do. Maybe I should find a failure.
Yeah.
Just like a stripper with daddy issues or something. I just need to bring in and just be like.
You just need to select somebody to be like, listen, not everybody has a success story. Well, I think the other thing is we don't talk about our failures. And this is something that we talk about actually in my workplace and in my profession is sometimes you don't see the possibility of being like somebody else. My boss talks about this because you think that they just got there with no difficulty, and you only see sort of their social media or their website profile life where it's like,
curated.
Graduated from all these places, published all these research articles. You don't see all the times where they tried an experiment in the lab and the mice died and, they had no publishable results, even though they had been grant funded to do the research, right? People don't tell those stories.
Right. Yeah. Because people like to curate their lives.
Yeah.
Because it makes it easier. Where I disagree with that. I think the more often you can see that people, especially successful people, that you can see that they have failed, I think that's far more valuable. Because I've always said that I've never learned how to do anything by doing something right.
Yeah.
I've always learned by my failures, which I have had plenty. So
is that what this podcast is about? No, I think it also takes vulnerability, which is something that took me a long time to allow myself to be vulnerable, especially in spaces where I thought I needed to look like the expert or have all the answers.
Right.
But it takes vulnerability and humility to admit, no, I do make mistakes. Not everybody likes, working with me. Not everybody finds the way that I explain their surgical recommendations to them to be helpful or beneficial. I mean, even all these years into this career, I'm just one person doing the best I can, and that doesn't work for everybody.
Right. So it's important to note, and we'll get back to it because I don't know, and I'm not. I've been really bad. I've been putting people on the spot. I'm like, so how many of these episodes have you listened to? Is one of the things. But so normally where I like to start is I like to start at childhood. But I probably do need to make sure that everybody understands that, when I said that Lily is successful in a difficult field, Lily's a surgeon. So we haven't had anybody in the medical field other than, well, we had a psych nurse practitioner, but we haven't had anyone that does physical medicine, if that makes any sense, even though mental health is physical health. Cassie, don't punch me in the face. All right. But it's definitely a different discipline.
Yeah.
And is something that most people know very little about. I know a lot about it because I watched MASH.
MASH.
So,
yeah. I also get, Scrubs, ER, Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah. Well, I watched MASH.
Dr. Pimple Popper.
I have a good friend that edited on Grey's Anatomy. So I'm basically an expert.
Probably.
So I'm going to use all kinds of words that you probably don't even know.
Well, that'll give me something to work on.
So I have a theory, and there's no scientific backing to it whatsoever. But it's still right because it's my theory that most people's first formative set of memories happened around the age of 5 years old.
And the reason that I think that is because I saw Return of the Jedi when I was almost 5.
Oh, and that's your earliest formative memory.
That is right there.
Yeah.
I have wispy memories of seeing a Cheech and Chong movie at a drive-in, but I like to believe that at around 5 years old, you're at least in a situation where your brain is working enough that you have memories. So that's where I like to start everybody. Because
can we start before that at my first formative
would
memory?
you like to?
Yeah.
How far back is it?
I was 2.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What do you remember?
And I think people say, oh, you don't really remember that. But I remember my dad taking me across the alley. We lived on College Street in Iowa City, and the Aishes lived across the alley, and their kids were Shelly and Jessica. And my mom went into labor with my brother, and so he had to take her to the hospital. So he took me across the alley to their house, and I stayed at their house while my brother was born.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Most people, when I ask them about their formative memories or like their youngest memories, they're like, I don't remember anything.
Yeah.
And that's very like, do you remember what you were wearing?
Yeah, I was wearing pajamas, and I didn't like them. And he either didn't bring clothes for me. My dad has passed, so we can't verify this memory with him either. But he either didn't bring clothes that I liked, or he didn't bring clothes with me at all. And then I think like Georgia, their mom, was like, "Oh, well, you could wear their clothes." It was all very uncomfortable experience for me, which is probably why I remember it. But and I have a few other memories from that house. And then we moved when I was 4, and I remember touring the house that we ended up moving into, like with the real estate agent or whatever. And then that's when I met my best friend, was in that house. So I was 4-ish. And she still puts up with me to this day. So that's part of the story of my life, I think, is that they're not a huge number, but I have some really long-standing close friendships, people who know me and can call me on my bullshit. And
I don't know anybody like that.
Support me. So yeah.
And so you have your best friend when you were 4 is still currently a staple in your life. That's very uncommon.
Yeah. Well, and again, I would say, like, if we're going to talk about the whole story, we had a couple times, once when we were teenagers and once when we were adults, where, we had a falling out and we worked through it. So, it's not, relationships are not linear. And I think being in a relationship with someone that long requires some grace, probably more from her than from me, to be fair. But, it requires effort and, And it's worth it. I mean, she is like a sister to me. I don't have any sisters. I have brothers. So
right. Well, and to think that you could have a friendship that would last that long without any type of conflict, that only happens on TV.
Yeah,
it's very unrealistic. And I think that's more common with girls than it is with guys. Because what I found as I've gotten older, I have way less friends, and friendships, period, just kind of evaporate.
Yeah.
Because it's weird how it seems like the bonding between guys is not as strong.
I think also when you think about how people bond and why they bond, some of our relationships, a lot of our relationships are sort of situational, and it doesn't make them of low quality. But, like the bonds you have with other parents who are like, they have kids in your kid's same grade. And maybe some of those turn into longer friendships. I mean, I know that happens to people, but sometimes it's like, yeah, it's great. I like being around you when we're together. If we have a play date, I might like hang out with you and have coffee while the kids play.
Right.
But, when the kids are 30, maybe we don't see each other anymore. And it doesn't take away from that relationship, but it just means that, you were kind of thrown together in this situation, and that was the foundation of the relationship.
Yeah, it's almost like orbits kind of, they intersect and they coincide, and then eventually the thing that was common, that commonality leaves, and you don't really have any reason to interact anymore. It's not that you don't like each other. It's just like, well.
And you have a lot of other things in your life, right?
Yeah.
So, you might have other family things that take your time. You might have work things. I also have these long bonds with people I've met through my career who I might see once a year or once every couple of years. And when we see each other, it's great. And I care about them and they care about me. I remember one of my friends, Allison Agon, saying to me, you look like you've come through something that was difficult and you're on the other side of it. And, that was after my divorce, and she didn't really know about the divorce. She just kind of read something in me. So you can have powerful connections with people, and it doesn't mean that you have to have constant contact with them.
Right. And I would say my quote unquote closest friends are people that are the furthest away, which is weird, because it's, I mean, you and I have stayed in contact and have become closer again, I would say, within the last 5 years. Yeah. And then, obviously my friend Tony, who was thousands of miles away, and now his friends have become my friends. It's hard for me to identify with people local, which is weird and sounds totally douchey. But like, I have a hard time making lasting connections and relationships with people that are local to me. And maybe it's because we interact less, therefore they have less likelihood of finding something about me they don't like. Or if it's just like the interests that, I have one buddy back home that we have a lot of similar interests, but for the most part, the business that I work for, like, I can't identify with most of those people.
Well, I think, it's part of the reason I think we have been friends is for so long is, we have some common experiences. I mean, speaking of formative experiences, like college is a pretty formative time,
Sure.
or even for people who don't go to college, like that early adulthood is a formative time in your life. And I think even though you made it sound like we didn't have anything in common, we had a lot of things in common about our worldview and also our experiences from our families of origin. And,
well, and I mean, I also, I think I owe a lot to you in that my worldview coming into college was very different than it was when I left college. And it was because of people like you that I interacted with that were like, hey, dummy, like, come on, man, you cannot think like that. Like, you are too smart or too kind to, like, that thought process is really going to stunt you, like, emotionally. I mean, I can't be any more stunted physically, but like emotionally, and as you mature, like I can't think of specific instances, but I know for a fact they happened where you would have looked at me and been like, are you serious?
Is that really
now?
What you think?
Do you really think that? Because I think we're going to have an issue if you really think that. But, I'd been raised somewhere where it wasn't super common to be open-minded or to be accepting of other cultures, sexualities, like all this other stuff. And I think that speaks to the commonalities of that time in life of that's time when you mature the most, and that being lucky to have people around to point me in the right direction. Because there were plenty of times, especially the first 2 years that we knew each other, that I was not pointed in the right direction at all. Like,
well, I mean, I think it's hard to, like, had a lot of competing things to think about at that time in my life, but I think one of the common themes is I always was kind of driven by a goal.
Mhm.
Just like my current goal of keeping my diabetic geriatric cat alive as long as possible.
Laser focused.
But and it wasn't always easy. My sophomore year, I was an RA and I was taking like organic chemistry and I don't know, physics, probably, all kinds of hard classes. And I got a terrible grade point average. And I had to like figure out how to fix that.
Right.
But I knew that there wasn't a safety net for me. I mean, I knew that nobody was going to like financially support me if I didn't figure it out. And I really thought that I wanted to go to medical school. I thought that I wanted to be a doctor. And so, that kind of more than anything carried me through. And I think you had less of a laser focused goal. I mean, you had things that you
That's a very
that you
kind way of
enjoyed.
saying it,
You had
yes.
things you enjoyed doing. You had a major, you loved theater,
Yeah.
but like you're like, I don't know, I'm doing this theater thing because it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had no idea. That's the bad thing about being involved. Like, oh God, I'm going to say this and it's going to make me feel dirty, but it probably would have been better for me to go to Iowa because the theater program at Iowa is more focused towards career.
Let the record show that he is wearing an Iowa State sweatshirt
Oh, yeah.
and talking about how much better Iowa is. I just wanted to point that out.
In that specific vein, I mean, I wore this sweatshirt on purpose.
I know.
I want to see if I can make it out of this town alive. There are no doors on my
that
car.
bad.
There are no doors on my car. I could be drug out of there at any stoplight. I mean, I'm very painfully loyal to Iowa State, but the theater program, and it's much better now because I've gone back and visited, and the head of the theater department right now is an amazing dude that's actually going to be on the show. His name's Brad Dell, and the program now is geared more towards a well-rounded view of performance and people getting jobs. It was not directed towards that. Leaving there, I had no idea. Where do I go?
What do I do now?
Yeah, what do I do now?
I have this degree.
Yeah, I guess I'll go teach.
Yeah.
And that didn't work out. And then it's like, oh, I guess I'll do stand-up. That didn't work out because I had no idea from a professional standpoint, like what I was supposed to do. The only thing I knew was you never pay an agent up front. That's the only thing they taught us about professional performance. So it's like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I mean, I wanted to be a stand-up comic since I was 5 years old. Like I knew I wanted to do that, but I had no idea how to do it, So no, I think that's fair to say I was not focused because I didn't know what, like not only just for a career or a job, but I didn't know what I wanted. Like, I mean, like I was like bad at being a boyfriend. I was bad at being a friend. Like I was bad at being a roommate, like because I didn't know who I was. I had no idea who I was. So I had to keep handlers around like you and Brooks. And
Brooks. Yeah. We'll give Brooks the credit.
Yeah, common people with common sense that were kind of like, dude, you gotta stop. You can't do that. You can't treat people like that. You can't talk to people like that. And it still didn't, this is not the right word, but it didn't perfect itself until like 20 years later. Yeah. I didn't finally realize like how you treat people is very important. But there were plenty of people telling me that, but I wasn't listening.
I think it's so hard. And again, this is where I have learned to give myself grace and give others grace, because the way that people behave is so often, I think, a reflection of something that you don't know is going on with them, and I guess that's empathy or sympathy to understand that that's happening. But, I learned anger as a way of expressing myself through lots of, negative experiences in my life. And I didn't always have the emotional regulation to be able to say, I'm anxious that this bad outcome is going to happen if, we make this decision in this situation. So, can we stop and talk about it, or
Right.
can we not go down that road? It would just come out as like, why are you doing that?
I've always tried to explain to people, especially later in life, that anger is not an emotion. Anger is a reaction to another emotion. So if, when you don't know what to feel, anger is the easiest thing to feel. Because, and I didn't know for the longest time because I was mad all the time and I didn't know why. And what it boiled down to is I was depressed. I was anxious. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know who I was. So it was just easier to be mad. And it was easier to be known as the guy who was mad and didn't take any shit from anybody because it's like, well, then now I have an identity. That is not a good identity to have. Like,
no, but I think one of the things that you and I shared in common was that same idea of not having sort of a stable safety net, right? Like,
Sure.
And I don't mean to say that angry behavior is excusable or anything like that, but I think, to really sort of understand what is lacking to make you feel safe. And maybe it's not something that you should have gotten from your childhood. Maybe it's not something from your family, but again, maybe it's not knowing where you're supposed to be going, but that dis-ease that comes from insecurity of some kind.
Yeah.
And not even being able to name it or express it. And I talk to people a lot about their career choices. And I think, I talk to them less about their life choices, but also sometimes how they're making decisions in their lives, right? As a physician, I think that you really have to think about, what do I want my day-to-day life to look like? And again, if I'm meeting somebody in their cancer diagnosis, right? They don't want any of it. Right. Of course, they're like, I want it to look like before the mammogram when I didn't have cancer.
Right.
Right. And you can't go back. But given the choices that are available to you, how do you want, the day-to-day life to look?
Well, and like everybody experiences some sort of trauma. And like the bad thing about the word trauma is it's not the definition people have given it, right? So as you are informed by your trauma, like that's what trauma informed is all about, is that you are a result of your life's experiences, is the easiest way to explain it. So if you have trauma has levels, sure, but those levels aren't determined by the outside, they're determined by you. So the level of the trauma is how it affected you, not what other people think how
it should have affected you.
How important they think it is, So maybe that is why we became friends so easily, is that because I don't think we talked about our, for lack of a better term, traumas until later in life. Like, I don't think we actually discussed it, but I think we saw it in each other. Like, I think we saw some kind of a likeness there, in that we both were scared of something. And I never thought about it until now. Oh man, my therapist is going to be so happy with you right now. Because I had never thought about, looking back, especially around college time, that I was afraid. Like I was legitimately afraid. I was afraid I'd never find love. I was afraid that the girls that I dated would leave me because I wasn't good enough, that I was less than, that, because somehow, I don't know how I did it, but like almost every girl I ever dated, people were like, what the fuck is she doing with him? So I always had this like
confidence,
this fear, maybe, I don't know, maybe.
Swagger. You're like, because why not me?
I got nothing else. It's height. That's what it was. But it was a constant fear of, when is she gonna leave? Like everybody leaves, so when are they gonna leave? And then
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy too, right?
Sure.
Right? Like, you either pick the person who's gonna leave you, or you create the situation where they're not going to stick around.
Oh yeah, I was like 100% a 38 Special song. Like, hold on loosely, asshole, because if you get all clingy, and it's not going to work out. But I was so terrified, and I'm only realizing that now, like in this moment. Yeah. Like that's why so many of my relationships were horrible, was because I was like so afraid they would be bad.
Yeah.
So again, like you said,
Yeah,
This-
no, but I mean
yeah.
that's certainly our commonality.
Yeah.
Right? Like I have been afraid of that, not just in romantic relationships, but in interpersonal relationships. And also turns out these things affect you in your whole life.
Right.
Like
Sure.
turns out you show up at work as the same person that you show up as at home.
Right.
And so, I think it's probably led me to like over volunteer for things and overcommit and be like, oh no, I can do that one more thing. Like
Right.
I'm probably almost good enough. Probably maybe if I do one more thing.
So you're overcompensating
Yeah.
for whatever it is less than thing that you're feeling. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, yeah, there's so much of it that's like looking back, it's just so wild. Looking at your younger self and having that rewind, which is one of the things I like about these conversations is that we're looking at people and trying to have them be introspective.
What would you tell him?
What would I tell him?
What would you tell 19-year-old Zach? Because that's how old you were when I met you.
Right. I like how you're flipping it and turning it into you're interviewing me. That's stellar.
I am an experienced podcast host.
Good job.
You.
Good job. Yeah. And what's the name of your podcast before I forget?
So I am currently co-host of The Operative Word, which is the podcast of the Journal of the American College of Surgeons.
Way fancier than what I'm doing. And I'm proud of you.
Thank you.
Good job. See how I deflected? Now I don't have to answer your question.
No, you still have to answer the question.
Okay.
Good try.
I would tell him, first of all, I'd just tell him knock it off. Like I'd be like, you need to calm down and you need to develop. I guess. So if I'm talking to him, does he know that I'm future him?
No.
He doesn't. Okay. Because if he knew I was future him, I'd be like, look, asshole.
Do you want him to know? Then
well,
he can know.
But if he knew, I would say, so it's probably a 2-pronged question. You could probably answer it 2 different ways. But if he knew that I was future him, I'd be like, look, believe it or not, in 20 years, you're going to develop empathy. So you should probably start working on that now. Stop being so selfish, because that's what it boiled down to. I wanted what I wanted when I wanted it. So, so like I wanted to, and so much of it was based around relationships, honestly, because my family dynamic was so goofy that I wanted in relationships what I didn't have in my family dynamic. Their wants and needs be damned. Yeah. Like I wanted it the way I wanted it, and that it was just a terrible way to look at things. I mean, we dated for 2 weeks.
Yeah, we did date for 2 weeks.
2 whole weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, you know what I was doing. Like, and it was like,
yeah. And then I was like, maybe we should just be friends.
Yeah.
It was better that way.
And it was 100%. Like, I think had we continued and had we dated for 6 months, we wouldn't be friends now.
No, we wouldn't be having
because
this conversation.
we would both be so resentful because at me. We would both be so resentful of me.
Resent you.
Yeah, because honestly, because I would not have been able to function in the way that a normal human being needs a partner to be. There's no way. There's absolutely no way. And I would say up until I won't even go all the way back to 14 years ago when I got married. I would say up until probably 6 or 7 years ago, I still wasn't functioning in a way. I was not showing up the way I should at all. And I still have work to do. But so I would tell him, look, man, you gotta not, and you just have to trust me when I say, if you continue on this path, things are going to be so much harder for you. I obviously can't tell him that his life will implode and nothing good will ever come of it, because things are okay. Yeah. But it could have been a lot easier, So what would you tell her?
Yeah, I think that she needed to hear that she was good enough. And I think she needed to stop doing things for other people. I think if I went back, I would say, all these adults in your life are telling you what to do. And they're so busy manipulating one another and you that they don't even know who they're manipulating in the moment. Like, just stop worrying about making them happy.
Right. So who did you need to hear you're good enough from?
Oh, probably my dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably my dad. And, probably like everybody. I mean, I think I was so unsure and people take advantage of that. right?
Yeah.
Like there are people out there who I still don't want to upset,
Mm.
which, maybe is silly, but my mom's boyfriend was terrible to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he had somehow ended up having a relationship with my paternal grandmother after my mom got sick and he was taking care of her. I mean, there were just these family dynamics that, gosh, I have understood as an adult and as a parent, which is not to say that I'm the world's best parent, but I try to be honest with my kids and I try to be open with them about the fact that I'm not perfect. And I think that the people in my life were like, you should be behaving this way and not that way. And,
Mm.
I think I was made to feel that I abandoned my mom in her illness.
Mm.
And I think that was, whether or not it was conscious, it was a deliberate manipulation tactic. Yeah, this is deep stuff.
By
Going to college and not being her full-time caregiver.
right, but I won't say his name because I
Yeah.
don't want to. But by him or by other family members?
By him.
That's rich.
Yeah, I know. I mean, just so to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
On the podcast, when it finally became an untenable situation, Zach came with me and helped me get my possessions from his house. So that's what friends do for one another.
I forgot about that.
Yeah,
I remember going over there one time and visiting, but yeah,
and again, right? Like nobody else. Very, very few people were in this story. And again, they may have different stories about how things went and why they went the way they do. And they did. And I don't want to bring up old wounds for them, which is why I don't, talk about it a lot.
right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
but she needed to know that that was all his problem.
Right. Right. And I think, yeah, and it's tough because I think the most important person that you needed to hear it from was you, because ultimately, and we as adults, we know this now, it doesn't really matter whether anybody else thinks you're good enough, but it's tough. And that's probably as a friend where I failed you, because I always put you up here because you were focused and you were like the example of like, okay, this is somebody who knows what they want to do. And I knew you were going to be a doctor. Like, it wasn't like a maybe this won't work out. And I was like, it's going to be fine. She's going to be fine. Like, it's going to work out. And I probably, and that's something I wasn't good at back then, because I wanted to talk about myself all the time, is that I didn't tell people, like how important they were or how good of a job they were doing, or, and not that like me being proud of you at 19 years old or 20 years old or 21 years old, it would have changed your life. But as a human being, I should have told you.
Well, I'm sure it would have helped. I think also, and this is part of the thing that I talk to a lot of people about, is that, the imposter syndrome is one of the terms that they use for it. But a lot of people don't feel good enough, even when to the outside world they look so incredibly successful. And people don't know that you need to hear it.
Right.
If you're not vulnerable enough to say, I don't feel good enough. Right. And sometimes it's a little bit maybe ego serving. But I remember one time sitting with my previous administrative assistant, Tara Martin, going over my CV, and she was like, you're doing a lot of things, right? And I was like, oh, really? Can we look at it together? Can you like point? Oh, you're right. I am doing a lot, right? Like maybe I am good enough, right? And Tara didn't know I needed to hear that, and it seems a little bit maybe silly from the outside to even think, yeah, she's like I'm currently, my title is clinical associate professor of surgery, right? Like, it doesn't sound like somebody who needs some reassurance, right?
But also, you're a human.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't lose sight of that. I mean, which is kind of what this whole conversation is about, is so often we lose sight of the fact that everyone is the same. And that's important, is you're not just your title. and you do need reassurance and affirmation, and you need all of those things. So that reminds me of something you said to me recently. I can't remember. It was within the last month, I think. And you said, "Oh, honey, we're both broken." and like, it was weird because I almost said that to you right now. And then I was like, oh, well, she knows because she's the one who told me. I was like, I was going to feel so important. Like, be like, oh, I got a great line for you. And then I was like, oh, that's her line. That's the tornado thing all over again.
That comic was so good, by the way.
Oh, God,
just so you guys know. He was hilarious.
For 5 minutes, he was awesome. And then it just all went downhill from there. But I think that once you learn to throw that garbage away and know that it's okay to want affirmation, even though you are very successful and people look up to you and people probably even covet what you have. People see you as being inspirational. People see you as being someone that they want to be. If they're not telling you that, if you were just to assume that, that makes you an asshole. You know what I mean?
Well, I think also if you're not in the right frame of mind to take it in, you don't see it, right? And you don't feel it. And so it doesn't, whatever that need is, it doesn't feed. And so one of the things that I have practiced in gratitude is trying to be better about expressing gratitude. You know, there are these things that people do all the time that I appreciate, but I don't tell them. So one of the privileges that I have is to work with residents and medical students and fellows, people who are training in medicine and particularly in surgery. And they do a lot of work to take care of our patients and to help ease my workload. And I really worked to deliberately say thank you to them for that, because they should know that their work is valuable and appreciated. Right. And I think it took me a long time to be like, oh, and that's on me, right? It's on me to make sure that they know that. Like, maybe they don't need it from me, but if they do, I should put it out there. And then the flip side is, I think for a long time when patients would tell me thank you, I would be like, yeah, but it's my job, whatever. And now I stop and I take a moment to savor that. Because it's a privilege to do what I do, but it also is important to recognize when someone appreciates what you've given them.
Right. And, it's uncommon, when you, especially in a professional setting, it's fairly uncommon for people to have their day-to-day work acknowledged. And I think that means a lot when it happens, like that when you are telling your residents and stuff, hey, you did a great job today, they're going to remember that. Because so many people say, well, doing task X, Y, and Z is your job. You get thanked for it by getting paid. But that's bullshit. And I'm in a management position. And one thing that I've tried to do more is just say, hey, good job today. Like, I don't even need to be specific about what the thing is, but just, and they're so like, what? It's like, good job today. Oh, okay, thanks. Like, what's coming next? Because
they're waiting for the other shoe to drop because they're not used to getting praise.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
and it's sad. Like, and I've even written like positive counselings, just like a positive performance thing that I give to people, and then it'll go to my boss, and he's like, "So you're praising them for doing their job?" I was like, "Yeah, and doing it well." Well, they're supposed to do that. I'm like, I don't even need to talk to you about this anymore. I'm not going to change you. But they got what they needed to get out of it. But I think
that's part of one of the things that we talk about in my work, which is attrition of surgeons, either, leaving during surgical residency training and not completing their residency training.
Sure.
So these are people who've invested 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, and then they're signing up for 5 or more years in general surgery. It's 5 years of residency training. You're a doctor, you're getting paid, but not, enough to pay off your student loans.
Right.
And, they don't make it through. And there probably should be some attrition, right? It probably shouldn't be 100% of people, because you get into it and you're like, oh, maybe this isn't quite the job that I thought it was going to be. It doesn't fit with my personality or whatever. But, are there people we lose because of reasons that are preventable? And, it goes on at the faculty level or at the practicing physician level too. And is it because we don't do a good job of these retention efforts, right? Like, we want you to understand that, doing a good job in and of itself is something to be acknowledged,
Right.
something to be talked about and praised. And, I also should point out that I've tried to work to be better at, all of the people I work with, because I can't do my job without a huge team. It's nurses, it's my administrative assistants, it's, all of the administrative people who help make the hospital run, the operating room run, it's the patient care techs, the nursing assistants. I mean, it's like there's not enough sort of roles or people, the people who clean the surgical instruments.
Right.
We have a whole group of people who their job is to make sure that we have supplies that we can use in the operating room.
Right.
And mostly it's really easy to complain, to be like, oh, this thing didn't come when I asked for it, or, why didn't you show up and automatically know my needs, by osmosis without me having to articulate them to you, right? It's easy in a stressful job environment or, in a busy workplace, whatever that workplace is, to forget that these are all humans who, maybe they have a sick parent or a sick child. I mean, they're showing up to work.
Right.
Maybe sometimes under the best of circumstances, but often, with other things on their plate.
People
and
have
then,
lives.
And then they're not being appreciated actively. I mean, hopefully we're doing better, but yeah.
And that's something that is a tough transition to make if you're not used to doing it. I mean, it used to be this person is an asshole. Or a way I've transitioned to is, why is this person being an asshole? Because there's usually a reason. Yeah, there are narcissists. There are people with histrionic disorder. There are people who are just sociopaths. There are these people. These people exist, but it's not everybody.
Yeah.
Most people aren't bad. They are a result of something else. And, to look at people and go, okay, why is, especially someone who's not traditionally struggling with something, why are they having a bad day? Why didn't they do their job? Why didn't they have all the instruments ready? Why didn't they have everything you needed, your calendar right? What happened today? Instead of, well, they're really just screwing up lately. But that's empathy. And sometimes when your tank's empty because you've been so busy or you're spread so thin, the first thing to go is empathy.
Yeah.
Because you're just tired.
No, and I think, we're both parents, and often I think our children or the other sort of people in our personal lives maybe get the least energy from us because we've spent so much of it during the day. And that is definitely something, that I have looked at. My work has gotten busier over the past year, just, for a number of reasons. And I've had to say to my kids, hey, there's I'm under stress. It doesn't excuse if I'm short with them or, but understand that when I come home and you ask me for 25 things in the first 5 minutes that I'm home, it's totally reasonable that you want me to be home and show up for you.
Right.
I just might not be there quite in the way that I should be, and here's what's going on. Here's the behind the scenes.
It's good that you make that effort though. That's something I'm bad at. I just get mad.
I mean, ask my kids, right? I can make it sound really good on the interview, but it's a practice, right? It's an in progress.
I think you're doing fine. Your kids are good kids. They're personable. They're successful. I think you're doing a good job.
They're amazing kids.
Yeah, and they're fun.
Yeah.
The first time I met. Well, first of all, I want Reed.
Yeah, Reed was at your wedding, right? Do you remember
this?
Do you remember when you came over and you're like, "Hey, man, have some champagne," and I was like, "I'm trying not to vomit all over your table right now." It was early in my pregnancy. I had to fly for work because I was in my research time when I was first pregnant with him. So I had a meeting to present at, and then I flew here for your wedding. I had to fly 3 times in the first trimester, and I was sucking on ginger and. And my morning sickness with him was not as bad as my second pregnancy, as my pregnancy with Jade. But yeah, I was like, hey man, I'm not drinking champagne. I'm drinking ginger tea. But thanks for getting married to Jenny because she's amazing.
Well, and it's funny. It's funny because the other day Jenny and I were talking. I don't remember why Reed came up in conversation, but we were trying to figure out how old he was, and I was like, "Wait a minute, I know how to figure that out."
When do we get married?
I mean, we can at least get close to
Yeah.
about how old he is. Like, it's so. I guess we could go on and on about like and bore people with how our lives have intersected repeatedly, but like it is weird to look back and just know that you have friends that you can share life's things with, and to just know that like, yeah, he was a bean.
He was a little bean. It was like a blueberry or something. I don't know what size he was. Yeah, no, and I think that is one of the things about being human that is most important and essential is the being known.
Yeah.
Right. And so that is why I'm grateful for the people in my life who've really known me for a long time. I said something to my stepmother the other day. I said, I didn't half-ass it or something. I was talking about something that I like put a lot into and didn't go well. And she's like, yeah, well, that like, I can't imagine you ever doing that with anything. Right. Because I think, and I don't know that I understood this about myself or saw it as exceptional, maybe partly because I was in spaces with a lot of other similar people, right? When you're in medical school, I mean, most of the people who get there didn't just sort of like fall into it. They had to do some work to get there, but I've been driven.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it's a lot to take on. I see that in my daughter who is driven to do her gymnastics and realize that it's, maybe not exactly the same as me, but to see it from the other side. And so to have people who know those things about you and those things which have remained consistent and those things which have changed as you've matured. Well, most of us have matured.
It's never going to happen.
I think that is incredibly valuable.
Do you think your drive, and I guess since we didn't really talk a whole lot about childhood, so this might cause us to rewind a little bit, but do you think your drive and you being known for being driven was innate, or do you think it was a response to needing people to see you?
I think it's probably a little bit of both, but I always was curious and I like wanted to have the answers and I wanted to do the things. I did something in elementary school that they called the extended learning program, which is sort of like a gifted and talented thing. And I remember I did a project on moths and butterflies, and I did a project on the history of, I think, Johnson County specifically, because, Iowa City was the capital for a short period of time. And I went to like the state historical or the Johnson County historical building to do it. But I think I have always been driven about learning. Like I wanted to learn, I wanted to understand why you cough. Not just like, why do you cough, but like, what are all of the physiologic and anatomic processes that happen? I don't get bored already, And so, I mean, I think that for me, that's the drive. And I'm competitive. I mean, I'm competitive, like, we used to play this rummy card game as a kid with my family, and I like always wanted to win. And I used to try to get my mom to play Boggle with me at night so that I could win, but also because I liked finding the words. And I think, I mean, if it's not innate, it certainly is intrinsic and maybe was fed by some of my circumstances. But it's hard to shut off, which is a lot sometimes.
Sure. Well, once it becomes part of the fabric of who you are, then it's just on all the time, and you have to give yourself, speaking, you've spoken of grace several times. You have to give yourself the grace to shut it off.
Yeah. But it's really hard. Like, the thing I realized was that I showed up to vacations with drive. I don't know if you're aware, but that's not actually what vacations are about.
Well, maybe you and Jenny should go on vacation together then, because
sounds good.
Yeah, because it's just go, 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 and I just want to sit on the deck and watch the ocean.
We took the kids to Washington, D.C. They were probably like 7 and 3, something like that.
Oh, that sounds like hell on earth.
And I was like, we got to go to like 2 museums a day. And the kids were like, ooh, can we ride the subway? And I was like, hey, but we got to go to this other museum. And my son was like, can I ride in the stroller too? And I was like, what are you talking about? So I looked at like my Fitbit or his Fitbit, I don't remember. And we'd gone like 17,000 steps in one day. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess maybe that's a lot.
You're 7.
know?
Okay.
So I do think like I have tried to work at like shutting it off.
So you have 2 smart kids. So let me ask you this, and this is like completely off topic, but I haven't had the opportunity to ask anybody else this. Do you ever struggle with remembering that your kids are the age that they are and expect them to be able to do things because they're smart and accomplished kids? Do you ever have trouble remembering that they're just kids?
I think we all do. I think regardless of like the child and what their strengths and weaknesses are, they're so good with their verbal skills, right? Whether it happens when they're 5 or they're 7, they sound rational.
Right.
And I know from my biology degree and my medical degree that their brain is still developing, and you know they can present a really good front, but that, like all of us, they're ruled by their emotions, and even more so. And so they can make a really logical statement and then take an action that's completely different. And you're like, we just talked about this. That's not the agreement.
Right.
You know, that's not the boundary. What are you totally sold me on the fact that you knew what was going on. Yeah. So I think I struggle with that. And then it's interesting too. I watch sometimes my son and my daughter interact, and they're 4 years apart. And so, you know, I think it's easier now, but especially when she was younger, I'd be like, dude, she's 4. Do you remember 4? I know it was half your lifetime ago, but you know, like just, I think you have to keep that in mind. Yeah, it's hard. And also, I mean, I think what I've learned is that the best model of parenting is high expectations, high support. But I think sometimes, you know, all of us struggle. Maybe we don't have the strength to set the high expectation, and we're like, I'll just do it for you. Or we struggle because we like set the expectation and then we forget that, you know, they're not adults.
Right.
They need support. And also to your point about, you know, using trauma-informed approaches to people, sometimes you just need more support.
Right.
It maybe you shouldn't, right? Like objectively, maybe you don't expect that, but sometimes you just need more support.
I am terrible in the moment. The next day, I'll realize I did it. But in the moment, especially my 7-year-old, when she needs something and asks for it, I'm like, just do it yourself. Like, you can do it. But then I remember 2 days later, I was like, but she's 7.
Yeah.
Like, she's just a little baby still. Like, I mean, as far as like from a maturation standpoint, yeah, okay, so she's 7 and reads at a 6th grade level. That doesn't mean that she can reach the things on the top shelf.
Yeah.
You know, like she's built like me. She's never going to be able to reach things on the top shelf.
And also, like, maybe it just feels good, right? Like my daughter could climb on the counter and get a bowl out for her cereal if she needed to. But maybe sometimes it feels nice to have somebody help you with it. And I think that, you know, depending on the parenting style that you had as a model, or depending on, you know, you know, that you might not have experienced that, or it might not be your default go-to, or again, you might be tired. And I think that's where what we're supposed to build is this space between the stimulus and the response, where we're like, you can, oh, you're 7. Yeah. Let me get that thing off the top shelf for you.
And for me, it's just like, basically, I mean, first of all, I don't want to fool anybody. She's manipulative as hell. But at the same time, she just wants that interaction.
Yeah, right.
Like, sure, she could do it herself.
Yeah. What is behind the ask? Is it that they really need emotional support? I think that's the work of parenting, is to learn how to recognize what's going on with the individual child, because they're all different. Mm-hmm. You know, that was a hard reality. I was like, oh, I'm having a second. Like, I kind of know what I'm doing. Right. And, you know, this is what we're going to do for getting her to sleep in her crib and, you know, all the things. And then I was like, oh, this child is a different human than the last one.
The most basic practical things are the second one. It's so much easier. But the personality things and the individuality, that is so hard.
Yeah, like you're like, I know how the diapers work. Yeah. But, you know,
I can put a bottle in her mouth, but why does this one not want me to hold her? Like, at all?
Mm-hmm.
but I have to look at her. That's the way Hattie was.
Yeah.
She did not want to be cuddled. And now she wants to be cuddled all the time.
Yeah.
But you pick her up and made her mad.
Yeah.
So you'd put her down and she'd sit there and stare at you. And if you looked away, she'd cry.
Yeah.
Back at her, she just wanted the attention, but she didn't want to be touched.
Yeah.
Now, Ellie, on the other hand, always wanted to be held. Like, she loved interacting with people. And so it's just like, what is happening? Oh, they're different people? Oh,
Yeah.
that's weird.
They're
Like,
different humans and they
yeah.
have different needs. And
yeah, it's exhausting.
yeah. But I think the other piece is that I didn't understand is to make space for them to express their emotions. You know, again, especially at the end of the day, because a lot of the work that I do, I mean, I go in to the clinic and I have a full day where I'm talking to people, and even those people who can be pretty logical decision makers around their own health, I mean, it's emotional.
Sure.
Right? So I come home and I've interacted with all these people who are emoting, and, you know, it affects me because I'm also human. And then I come home and I'm like, oh my gosh, why are we emoting more? You know,
Right.
and it's like, because that's their job. But
Right.
but I think that I was dismissive early on as a parent. I was like, don't cry. I remember hearing myself say that to my son, don't cry about that. And then I was like, you know, the 2 days later, I was like, oh, that might not be what I want to say to him. Like, I might be surprised that he's crying about a specific thing, or my daughter's crying about a specific thing. But, you know, like, I'm not in charge of whether or not they're allowed to have the emotional reaction that they have. I am there to help them learn the coping skills
Right.
when things in life don't go exactly the way they want to.
But what if I don't have the coping
Yeah,
skills?
well, that's why we're all continuing to work on ourselves. Yeah.
Those who do the podcast will return after this message.
Multispective is a podcast where we interview individuals around the world with unique stories and experiences. Guests share in detail some of the traumas they faced.
You know, because I feel in some ways so disgusting and broken on the inside, you know, I'm going to work on my outside, and that's going to make me feel better.
Mental health issues they've lived with.
I was very hyper, like I felt good. That's one thing of mania, like you feel good.
Decisions they've made.
My life changed drastically in that moment. That one moment, I can't even begin to describe to people how hard, how good, how scary, how disturbing and emotional that moment was smoking crack.
And more importantly, how they found strength, resilience, and healing.
Just being able to think and have conversations and walk places, that really helped me, accelerate the process of, rebuilding burnt bridges.
Tune in, subscribe, rate, and review Multispective on www.multispective.org or your preferred podcasting app. You can also find us on any of the social media platforms that you use. Your feedback is always welcome. Lots of love, Multispective.
I've acknowledged that I use all my patience up at work. I have none when I come home. None left. And I am horrible. But I can't figure out how to fix that.
Yeah.
That's one of those things that it's like, shit. Well, so would a different job fix it? Grass is greener, baby. Grass is greener, So it's just nice to hear that I'm not on an island because I wonder about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's validating to know that other people struggle with these things. That's one of the reasons I've found a lot of benefit in the community, especially of other women physicians and other, physician parents. And I think because I'm a woman, more those who do it from the gender perspective of a woman, but, not just women, and how they try to figure out balance. Balance is this like dangerous word because it sounds like something you should achieve, but how they figure out how to manage the multiple demands on them in their lives. And sometimes it's taking care of an ailing parent or, a geriatric cat or whatever. There's a lot of practices out there, but it's hard to build habits, right? So some of the practices are like to have a transition, a practice where you transition from work to home, to try to help yourself at least get in a better frame of mind. You're not going to like suddenly have all this energy, but where you like do your best to put the work stress aside.
I don't wear the same clothes home that I wear at work. And that's something I've been doing for about 7 years now. Like, I'm like, nope, I will wear a completely different outfit to work,
Mhm.
change my clothes, wear work clothes, change my clothes back, and leave.
Mhm.
I think it helps.
Well, and it's time, right? It's a little bit of time that
Yeah.
you're taking as you're like making a deliberate transition from work to home.
Yeah, to me, it's like, it's theater
Mhm.
for me. Like, I wear a costume at work,
Mhm.
and then I take that costume off, and then I put on
And
real
then,
clothes and go
and
home.
then you're dad.
Yeah, yeah, and
Zach dad.
I don't know that, but it makes me feel a little bit better, I think, because I don't particularly identify with my company that I work for.
Yeah.
So like, the more I can distance myself and remind me, because work-life balance is huge. Probably something you struggle with.
No, and I think, it's easier too sometimes to see it for someone else. So my ex-husband, I remember being stressed about just the workload, right? The total workload on him, and the challenge of trying to show up as dad and partner and surgeon. And he said that I can talk about him, so hopefully he will find this respectful. But at one point I said, I think when you're on call from home, it's not working well. We've young kids, and the pager going off is distressing to them, and also you're feeling this pull in both directions. Plus, you have all this work that is hard to get done because the workload on physicians is unrealistic.
Oh, sure.
Particularly in the era of the electronic health record. And you can read a bunch of stuff out there if you really want to learn about the challenges of our modern healthcare practice. But, I said, why don't you start taking your calls in the hospital? And then if you do have some downtime, you can use that downtime to do some of the work that you feel like is piling up that you never have time to do, right? So if he's on an overnight call shift, rather than trying to be home because it's like, oh, I should be there to support the family,
Right.
which is a wonderful intention. And I appreciated that so much, but it wasn't working in practice when the kids were little. And so he did that, and it really helped.
So to just treat it just like another shift.
Yeah, treat it like
work.
another shift instead of like, well, I'm going to be home for as many hours as the job allows me to, knowing that I might get called back in. Like, and as the kids got older, I think it mattered less. Because they were less disrupted, they were happy to have him home for a little bit if he could be home, and, understood that he might have to go back.
When you first started that story, I was like, can you choose not to be on call? But now I understand.
Yeah, you could, if you're within like 20 minutes, you could theoretically take your calls from home, because if somebody got in a car accident, and was coming into the emergency room, you would have a few minutes heads up, to get in
I guess
there.
the way I always, and this is my ignorance, is to especially to like emergency healthcare of any kind, like it's like I just assumed all doctors had an on-call shift. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then when you just, I was like, wait a minute. So like you could just not do it at all, and then it made more sense when you're like, no, you still have to do it, but you can do it at the hospital.
This is like all the other things in my life where I'm like, oh, well, people should have just known what I was thinking without me explaining the calendar call shift in my head that was making him on call, 4 days a month from home.
It makes more sense. Like, it was what I thought it was.
Yeah.
And then it confused me for a second, thinking like, wait a minute. So it's just like, there's just some doctors are like, yeah, I don't want to do on call.
Yeah.
So, and then there's others like, yeah, I'll totally do it. No.
Yeah.
Okay. Now
Yeah.
it was the way I originally thought it was.
But the call assignments, are different, right? Depending on what hospital you're working at, depending on what your specialty is, and also maybe depending on how many of you there are.
Oh, sure.
Right. So for my practice, I'm a breast surgeon, which is mostly taking out cancer, but also benign diseases. And, we don't have a lot of things that cause us to get called into the hospital to work at night, sometimes an infection or a surgical complication. But so most of the time we kind of split up the calls over a month among three of us, and you don't get called in that much.
Right. Because most of your stuff is like scheduled.
Is scheduled elective practice. Whereas, if you're a trauma surgeon, again, it's going to depend if you're in like downtown Philadelphia versus if you're in Iowa City, but you need to be available for whatever things happen.
I mean, there's a big difference between, hey, we have this thing that we have to take care of. We're going to schedule it for 2 weeks from now. And, oh God, he's got an arm off. I mean, there's two very different things.
It's just a flesh wound. Sorry, that's a little bit of gallows humor. I hope your audience appreciates
they deal with me on a regular basis. So what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
So how is your parenting style informed by the way that you were parented? because because there are going to be some similarities because your parents divorced. You're now a divorced mom. You have to balance that.
Mm-hmm.
You lived through it. Obviously, it was different for you than it is for them. But how much of that informs how you parent?
Yeah. I mean, I think, for me, my mom was always kind of the more stable home person, partly because when I was younger, she didn't work. So she was kind of the consistency. And I don't think she always knew what to do with me. Like, I wanted to be out in the backyard climbing the mulberry tree.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, hey, you want to do this art project with me? And I was like, can I dig up over here in this corner and see if there's any buried treasure and like make a tent? And
Right.
she was like, sure, you can do that if you really need to, but dig over here, not over there.
Right.
But I think, one of the things that she did was she tried to do a lot of fun things. So I still remember learning to cook and bake with her, and she tried to do practical things. She wanted us to be prepared for life. So she had this effort where we each had to make a meal a week. And I was, 10, 12, something like that. And so you had to plan the meal, you had to shop for it, and then you had to prep it. And it turns out like that's a lot of skills to learn.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because the broccoli doesn't cook at the same rate as the chicken.
Right.
And the whole meal has to be hot at the same time. Her mother grew up in a restaurant. So this is like in my grandmother's house, the Thanksgiving dinner, like the plates were warmed on the oven, door, like everything, it was very reminiscent of the German restaurant that her mom owned in North Dakota when she was growing up, my grandmother's mother. But anyway, so, she taught us those things, how to do our laundry. I mean, I think a lot of what my parenting is from her is trying to get my kids the skills that they need to be self-sufficient in life eventually. And I would do more of that, I think, if I had more time. But, I do try to kind of teach them how to do things for themselves. And then I think I have really tried to be more open with my kids and vulnerable than I think the parenting I received was. And again, we all are learning as we're parenting,
Right.
even because I spent a lot of time like babysitting. I thought I knew a fair amount, right? I babysat, I did camp counseling stuff, but you're learning as you go along. And it's different when it's your own kid than when it's somebody's kid that you give back after 4 hours.
Well, yeah. I love my grandson.
I know. I hear you guys are like, no, you can send him over here for longer.
But we want the other ones to leave, but he can come up.
But I think, and I think I have in my busy career tried to make sure that they always have someone they can rely on. And that's always for us been paid help. My in-laws also lived not that far away, like 2.5 hours away when my son was young. And so they would come and help as well. But, I've always tried to make sure that they had somebody there. I do remember when my dad was an attorney, he worked full time. And anytime I called his office, the phone call was supposed to be put through.
Oh, wow.
And so again, I've tried to make sure that it's hard when you're in the middle of surgery, you can't be completely available,
Right.
but that my kids always have somebody available to them because I do think that was something that was important to me, that they have kind of the support and the help that they need. My son the other day was invited to do this leadership opportunity at one of the elementary schools where they went in and talked about what it's like to go into junior high. And he told me about it on Monday, and I think it was Wednesday, and he's like, I have to be there at 8:25 in the morning. Normally he rides the bus. And he was like, is that something you can make happen? I was like, yes, we will make this happen. Right? Like I have to be in surgery, so it's not going to be me driving you. But but yeah, I think that both from the positives and the negatives that I experienced, I really want them to feel that they are supported, especially in doing the things that are important to them, that they want to do.
Do you find coming from being a child of divorced parents, do you find that when it became apparent to you that there were issues in your marriage, that it made you fight harder for it or be more accepting of that this is just something that may happen and I was okay, they'll be okay?
Yeah, no, I was devastated. It wasn't the plan.
Right. No.
Right.
Right.
And I, I think we did a lot of work to try to figure it out. Hopefully it's we. But I'm only representing myself, obviously. Yeah, I was it was not what I chose, but I also grew up with a lot of conflict in my home.
Sure.
And I didn't want that for my kids. And I think that, at the point at which I realized that this was going to be better for me, first of all, and, to be a good parent, I think you have to be well, and better for them. Then I just had to figure out how to make it work in the most stable way that we could. And so that really informed me. And I told the kids, and I got this from someone else, that we're still a family. It just has a different shape. And I have tried to live that and honor that. I'm sure that I screw it up just like everything else. But yeah, it definitely informed me. I mean, my things were so contentious, is what I remember as a kid. And it doesn't mean that I have always said positive things about their dad to my kids, but I try to remember that how awful that felt as a kid. And, to try to avoid putting the kids in the middle. It's not their job to be my counselor or my confidant. And I want them to have a great relationship with their dad.
Right.
Right. Who wouldn't want that for their child? I mean,
Believe it or not, some people.
There might be some parents out there who really are just not good for their kids, and the kid is better off without the relationship. And but that's not my situation. So I try to support that relationship, which means being flexible, which is not one of my strengths, in case you weren't aware. But yeah, I think, having the humility to say to them, I wish it had gone differently. Right? Like this is not the path that I would have chosen for you, but it's the path we're on, and, we're on it together.
Yeah.
So yeah, the literature out there says, this is my, analytical side. The literature says that generally kids do pretty well when they are, raised in a divorced versus a married or partnered household, in terms of how they function and develop, just if that's the factor that you're looking at, but that sometimes they have a little more trouble in developing their own romantic partnerships in the future. And, that's what therapy is for, I guess.
Right.
So hopefully they can figure it out.
And how old were you when your folks split?
10 officially, but the first time I remember my dad moving out, I was 6.
Oh, and that's tough. That adds a whole nother layer when it happened more than once.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the breakup is probably way harder on kids than just leaving it off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the uncertainty of that, and I don't think my parents, did it on purpose.
Sure,
right? It was just the reality that they were living through.
Yeah. Well, and it's just like anything else. Like you think maybe you figured it out, so you think it's fixed, and then it turns out it's not. But
or again, I think you. I mean, I told you I'm persistent, right? Like, I went into marriage with the plan for it to last, and I think that's how a lot of adults are. And
that's the idea, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and so and so you stick around, and in retrospect, some people might think, oh yeah, that went on too long.
Yeah.
But it's not just true for marriages. It's true for relationships, romantic and otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes friendships don't serve us, and
right.
Yeah.
Sometimes pet ownership. I mean, it can be anything. I mean, like, honestly, like sometimes it's just like, maybe I don't need a cockatiel, like maybe who knows? Like,
are they loud? Cockatiels?
Yeah, they are. And they're selfish.
I mean, sometimes it's good to have someone selfish around you to teach you about being selfish.
Well, talk about looking at the sunny side. Like there's a silver lining if I've ever seen one. So we, and like, I don't want to keep obsessing on negative things, but I think it's important for people who listen to one of the ideas behind this show is so that people don't feel alone in whatever it is they're going through and understanding. So how, going through a divorce, how did it affect work, especially because you both work in the same field?
We work in the same field and the same workplace.
Right.
And so, I think I approached it as, I was committed to both of our careers being successful, which is good for our kids as well, and good for our colleagues. And I just went in and I told my boss, or maybe I sent an email. I don't even remember. It's a long time ago now. It feels like a long time ago. The pandemic, multiplied every year by a lot. But I just said, like, this is going on and we're both committed to it, not having a negative impact on our work.
Right.
I think for me, too, it felt authentic to be honest about it.
Sure.
Because I think when things weren't going well and we were trying to work on them, it wasn't something that I wanted to talk about publicly, partly because it was uncomfortable, but partly out of fairness.
I think it's healthier to not talk about it publicly in that situation.
Yeah. So, once we had gotten to that point, then, I didn't need to broadcast it or talk to each person individually, but I wanted at least, to be honest with my closest people about it.
Well, if you share colleagues and share friendships, it makes sense to just kind of be like, hey, heads up, and ideally, if you can successfully co-parent, you can probably successfully coexist in a professional setting.
Yeah.
So it's win-win. Win-win-win-win, just win-win. Yeah, win-win.
Yeah. The options are win-win or no deal. I read that book.
Oh.
So you don't go with win-lose.
Yeah, because that's not good for one person. And if it's not good for one person, it's kind of not good for both of you.
Yeah.
Successful co-parenting situations, which it kind of seems like you got going on. It seems like you guys are pointed in the right direction, are so good for the kids.
Yeah, I hope so. I will say, that it takes two parents for that to work, and, two parents who are committed to doing what's best for the kids.
Right.
And, I hope that can be everybody out there. And again, I hope that we can both live that intention, because I'm sure that sometimes while I have that in my head, I don't see it in the right light in the moment, or, I get fixated on what I think is best for the kids instead of what they think is best for them.
Right.
But yeah, I think you have to come from this, you when you have kids with somebody, you are signed up to interact with each other for life.
Right.
And, the people who didn't make that commitment are the kids.
Right.
So, they didn't have a choice in the matter, but you have a choice to show up for them.
And I think if you co-parent well and healthily, it can circumvent the relationship the negative relationship impact that it can have on the kids.
Things that it might affect their future relationships.
Yeah, because if they see, look, they're fine. It's just a different type of relationship, then maybe they don't go, all relationships fail, because they don't have to. Because if you're co-parenting effectively, your relationship didn't fail.
Yeah. Well, and I think, there's so many other people who are involved too. My ex-husband is my niece's goddaughter. And, those relationships.
Wait a minute. I don't think you said that right.
God. Editing. My ex-husband is my niece's godfather.
There we go. You almost got away with it. I was like, because I knew what you meant. Sure.
It was totally clear in my mind. Yeah, and so, and so those relationships are important, and my son is actually better at this stuff than I am. So he helps me stay connected to my in-laws. And my ex-husband is gracious enough to allow us to stay connected, and it's the best thing for the kids, and so I think with respect to the fact that they're his parents and that their relationship comes first, it doesn't have to be kind of all or none.
Right. And again, that's good co-parenting. It's not this zero-sum game when a divorce happens. I've been very lucky that I like Jenny's ex-husband. We get along. We always have. There's never been any the reasons that they aren't together anymore. It's a multitude of reasons. but he's a good dude, and it's good co-parenting there. So we have great relationships. Like, we always say hello to each other. We chit chat, so like it's so much easier that way. Like it really is, like when you can co-parent instead of it being this like us versus them or me versus him or him versus me. Like it's just in the long run, it's going to be so much better.
Yeah. And it's, again, it's good for me because if I need to, get some extra help because of a work thing or whatever, it's mutually beneficial,
right?
Because, the kids, instead of me like having to find an extra sitter, the kids can just be with their dad. Right. Like,
right.
Which is what it would have maybe been like if we had stayed together.
And I know so many divorce relationships where that isn't like, it's so convoluted and fucked, honestly. Like, well, the kid's sick, so I have to stay home from work. Like, why? Their mom's right there. Well, if they go to their mom, I have to pay her for daycare because it's not her normal day to have them. Are you fucking serious? Like, that's insane. Like, to have so much toxicity in a relationship where, like, one parent wouldn't just be like, yeah, just drop them off. They're my kids, too. Like, it's just so weird to me. So, like, to know that those things are out there and that could be a possible alternative instead of just like, hey, we want what's best for the kids. Like, what a weird concept.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I mean, I think, again, like human relationships are interesting and they're challenging. This is what I tell my kids about being siblings, right? Like interacting with other humans is hard. And, sometimes we make it harder than it has to be. Also, but yeah, it's, we all show up as ourselves and we all are a product, like you said, of whatever made us either a little bit or a lot broken, that we're trying to figure out how to cope with.
Right. What is something in your life? Obviously, a divorce that's obvious. So you can't include that. Okay. You can't. What's something in your life that you were very surprised that didn't work out or that worked out differently than you would have ever expected?
Well, I didn't know that I was going to medical school to be a surgeon.
Okay.
Right. So I went straight from college to medical school. And even though like I really loved anatomy, I didn't sort of figure it out until I was in the operating room as a clinical student. And, I'm sure it didn't happen in just this one case, but I remember doing an open abdominal aortic aneurysm repair with Robert Atnip. And I mean, I just fell in love with the living anatomy. It was like, there's no more amazing thing. And I told somebody this recently, it's really a sacred thing. And I don't even know that I mean sacred in the sort of completely religious sense, but another human is trusting you so much. And we're really pushing science into a space where, it's no longer sort of the next frontier, but we're going in and rearranging people's anatomy with a hope to cure disease, either to make them feel better or to prevent something from making them feel worse. I don't know. I was not prepared for that. And it's a really hard road. I mean, medical training is a hard road. Yeah. Shortly before I entered surgical residency, they enacted this thing called the 80-hour work week, which was in response to this legal case in New York, the Libby Zion case. But before that, surgery residents, just worked 120 hours. I mean, my grandfather was a general practitioner. He used to say, that it's living at the hospital, right? That's why they call it residency. But yeah, the work is hard and it's grueling, and the culture, I think, is changing, but the culture was not necessarily supportive of, you as a human. You really have to be hard and tough. And, you've been up 30 hours. That's great. Here's your next list of things to do. And again, we've worked to change that, right?
Because I would hope so. Truck drivers are only allowed.
Yeah, I know, right? Right. So, during my career, that there's been a lot of work to change that, but it's hard. And I told you before, like I'm driven and I like to sign up for hard, challenging things. When I was when I was in elementary school and you had to pick a band instrument, I picked the flute, not because I had aptitude for it, but because it sounded pretty. And, I was like, I can do this, right? I think they were like, you should play trumpet. And I was like, that's great. I'm going to play flute. But yeah, I really fell in love with the living anatomy. And now what I get to do is this mixture of interacting with people, and hopefully helping support them through a difficult and scary time, while also, giving them a surgical outcome that helps meet their goals and needs.
How did you land on your specialization?
Yeah, that happened, I think, because I liked the medicine aspect of surgery. So, some of the things that we do, I mean, there's surgeons are not just technicians. So in all of it, there's medicine. You might meet somebody who their primary care doctor thinks they need to have their gallbladder removed. And you might say, I think it might be reflux. Let's do some other testing before we take your gallbladder out. You have to be thinking about the medicine aspect of it. But, there's a lot that goes into breast cancer in terms of understanding the systemic therapies, the chemotherapy or the other drugs that they're going to be given, and the radiation, and how that influences which surgery is an option. And, the biology of their tumor may dictate whether they should start with chemotherapy or start with surgery as the first treatment. So all of that kind of thinking, was appealing to me.
So is that who makes that recommendation? Is that you as the surgeon that says, hey, they're not ready for surgery yet, let's try this first?
In my practice, it's really multidisciplinary. That's like the key word, right? So that means that I'm talking with a medical oncologist.
Okay.
And, maybe with a radiation oncologist, or I'm looking at the mammogram and the MRI of the breast with a radiologist to say, like, hey, I need more sense of how big this tumor is, or how many lymph nodes are involved, to try to give the best recommendation. And then it turns out you have to look at the patient as a whole human.
Sure.
Right. So they, if they're 80 versus if they're 40,
Right.
if they have other medical problems, versus if they're in pretty good health with a cancer diagnosis, that's going to influence the recommendations that we make, or the options that are available to them. But yeah, I love that I get to practice with these other experts who are smart, and I like the surgeries that we do. I still miss a little part of me still misses some of the general surgery, the abdominal surgeries. I really liked taking out the gallbladder, laparoscopic cholecystectomy, but I don't miss it enough that I wanted to continue to spread myself that thin.
Right.
So I came out of surgical residency and went to a breast surgical oncology fellowship at the Mayo Clinic for an extra year of training, when I knew that was what I wanted to do. And I think the other thing that I like about it is that most of the patients I treat are women, and I like the women's healthcare sort of aspects of it.
Sure.
Particularly, we're dealing with things around like their hormones. So some of the drugs that we're giving them maybe are putting them into menopause, or giving them menopausal type side effects. We're thinking about, maybe they need to stop taking their estrogen replacement therapy, which might have been really integral to their day-to-day functioning.
Right.
And thinking about the cosmetic outcome. So we talk a lot about the cancer outcome. And when the practice of surgery changed to do lumpectomies, so not removing the entire breast, but removing just the tumor for a lot of women, there wasn't a lot of focus on the cosmetic outcome. It was like, well, we can take less of your breast, and certainly less disfiguring than the old-fashioned mastectomies. Now we really think about what they call oncoplastics, which is sort of how do you think about the cosmetic result as a close second to the cancer outcome. So, being able to kind of bring all those different aspects in. There's like a little bit of the art of medicine, a little bit of the art of surgery.
Do you deal, because men get breast cancer also?
Yeah.
Have you dealt with men?
Mm-hmm.
How is it different?
Well, I mean, first of all, most men are really shocked to get their first mammogram. And they say, oh, now I know what all the women were complaining about all these years, because mammograms are not comfortable.
Right.
But I think, we just have less research on the treatment of men with breast cancer. And I think there can be stigma around it. Now, there can be stigma around, having cancer to begin with. It turns out a lot of people who have cancer have financial problems, or even lose their jobs, even though, there are legal protections out there. But it can be hard if you're going through a lot of treatment to, maintain your work. So looking at men and sort of the research that we do have, and then also, not having biases about what they might expect for their outcome. It used to be like, well, they just get a mastectomy. Well, maybe we can do lumpectomy and radiation in men too. Maybe we don't have to do as big a surgery. And, what do we do for follow-up? There's less data around, should we keep doing mammograms? Because we weren't doing mammograms to screen them in the first place. Right. So, yeah. So I think, it's less data. And the other thing that I do is, we treat people who have either non-binary gender identities or gender dysphoria. And so it's important to bring into the treatment, again, understanding them as a whole person. Where are they on there? Are they, doing hormones for transitioning from one gender to another? Where are they on that journey? And how do we provide care for the cancer that is also, concordant with their goals and outcomes for treatment?
How much research has there been into like people who are post transition and breast cancer?
Yeah, not enough.
Not enough.
There is some research, and the University of California at San Francisco probably has the best up-to-date information on screening. So there is some research, if you've had 10 years of hormone treatment to transition from male to female, that you probably should have screening imaging, maybe starting at age 50. But it's definitely an evolving area of research.
And since there's probably not enough of a cohort to determine whether someone who has transitioned is just as much risk as someone who was born a woman, or less risk, or
there is some research out there, and I just don't have those numbers in front of me to like quote the numbers, but the risk is definitely higher for male to female gender transition than if you are cisgender male.
Sure.
But I just don't have the numbers in front of me.
And do you think that's just because I don't know that there's more tissue?
Yeah, I don't think it's probably just the tissue. It's probably also the hormonal effects, right? The estrogen effects at that breast tissue.
So does more estrogen increase the likelihood, or less estrogen increase the likelihood?
So this is complicated, right? Even when we look at those who are cisgender and were assigned female sex at birth, because there's research showing that estrogen exposure, unopposed estrogen exposure, is one factor that increases your risk for breast cancer, somewhat, small relative increase. So if you have early menarche, early periods, and late childbirth, or you don't have a child, you don't have a pregnancy that disrupts that estrogen, then you have an increased risk of breast cancer compared to someone who has a pregnancy, or who had a shorter period of time from their first period to their first pregnancy. But all of these factors are kind of additive or multiplicative. There's some research that suggests obesity is a risk factor, and people think that maybe that's because there's overall more circulating estrogen. Alcohol use, especially heavier alcohol use in the teens or 20s, is associated with a somewhat increased risk, but it's not the only factor. And for most women, we don't know why they got breast cancer. Their biggest risk factor is genetics, is being female, right? If you're assigned female sex at birth, and aging, right? So the older you get as a female, the higher your risk of breast cancer.
How much do genetics play?
Yeah, genetics play some factor. I mean, we know about mutations, and we're learning about more gene mutations every day. In fact, some people are proposing that maybe we should just do population testing on everybody to find out what their genetic risks for disease are.
Oof.
That is beyond the scope of this podcast. But yeah, we know that the majority of breast cancers are not associated with a known genetic risk. But we know that there's some familial risk too, and we don't know, is that, epigenetics? What exactly is that? So if your mother had breast cancer, your risk is going to be a little bit higher than a woman whose mother didn't.
No, because one of the reasons I asked that is it seems in popular culture right now, there's been some kind of an uptick in people talking about going and getting like full mastectomies because of a family history. Is there any science to that, or is that just like
so
a thing?
Again, if we look some people called it the Angelina Jolie effect too, right? Because she, according to the lay press, I don't have any medical knowledge of her, had a BRCA mutation, and women with a BRCA mutation are going to have something like a 60%, maybe even an 80% lifetime risk of breast cancer.
Wow, that's really high, right?
Yeah. So, right, you could flip it around. You could say, well, 20 to 40% chance they're not going to get it. So they're more likely to get breast cancer than not.
Yeah, way more likely, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Whereas most people who have a family history or maybe who have some atypical cells found on a mammogram guided biopsy will have maybe a 25% lifetime risk, which it depends. I've learned, I used to think that, I wasn't explaining statistics well, but it turns out people look at statistics differently, right? Because they're humans.
Right.
And so some people might, I've had, I've talked to people and said, oh, we estimate your risk to be about 25%. And they're like, oh, phew, I thought it was much higher. Right. And then there are other people who are like 25%, that's terrible.
It's all a matter of perspective, really.
It is. Turns out it's all about, you could say it's about science, but it's really about perspective. Yeah. So I think, for the gene mutation carriers, the research suggests that preventive surgery makes sense, that it's going to, significantly lower their risk of breast cancer and also their mortality. For people who have a more intermediate risk or, have a single relative who had breast cancer, you really have to look at their individual risk and do a risk calculation. And that's something we're pushing to be better about for breast cancer screening as well. The U.S. Preventive Service Task Force just came out and said that we should start at 40, which a lot of organizations have been advocating for ever since their recommendations came out in 2009, saying that we should move to start at 50. But that's starting at 40 for average risk women. And so we really need to identify if we're going to offer the most effective screening or, the earliest screening to those at higher risk, then we need to figure out who's at higher risk by doing a risk calculation. And then that leads to your question, which is, do some of those people maybe consider doing surgery to lower their risk? But the number one thing is, are you on the best screening protocol for you?
Is there any negative risk of having mammograms?
Yeah. So people worry about the radiation exposure, but it turns out that, walking around on the earth gives you radiation exposure.
Right.
So
a lot, actually.
we do try not to start mammograms until about age 30. In even those higher risk women, we'll start MRIs at 25 of the breast if it's appropriate, to sort of not just balance that radiation risk, but also to make sure that the mammogram is effective, because younger women tend to have denser breast tissue and we want a good diagnostic study.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is strange because I was listening to a story somewhere about it, and I hadn't ever considered the density of the breast tissue. But then when I heard it in the story, I was like, oh, that does make sense. And now this is the second time I'm hearing it in a month.
And there's probably also some genetic or environmental factors that affect breast density, which again is why it should be something that we talk about and we look at, are there, supplemental screenings that should be offered to women with denser breast tissue.
And is there any correlation between the density of the breast tissue and the likelihood for cancer? Is there
a little bit? Yeah. So density, women who have more than 50% of their breast tissue is dense on a mammogram is how that's categorized, have a slightly higher risk of breast cancer compared to women who have more fatty tissue. But again, it's a little bit higher. It doesn't put them from an average risk to a high lifetime risk.
So it could be, even if it's studied at a later time, it was just a small enough percentage that it could be thrown off by the sample size.
I would say, the density has been pretty well proven in the research. I believe the research shows that density does increase your risk, but it's like, by 1.1 or 1.2, multiplier. It's just not a huge relative risk increase.
How about ethnicity or anything? Is there any difference?
Again, this is an area of evolving research, but there is research that shows that Black women in the United States or African American women get breast cancer at a younger age overall, and that the breast cancer specific mortality is worse. And that is outside of what stage, how advanced the breast cancer is when it's diagnosed.
Okay, so that was going to be my next question. Would there be other factors as far as lack of availability of healthcare and stuff? But if it is independent of the stage, then I guess
there probably are these systemic factors, right? And I don't want to even say probably. It's clearly not just something that's biological. It is something that we need to improve. from a healthcare
or at the very
system
least figure
standpoint.
out why.
Yeah, but I think it's you know, as a healthcare system, we need to do better. And I don't have the research in front of me to quote, but there's some great research out there showing things like time from diagnosis to surgery, you know, may be part of the problem.
Sure. Yeah, I suppose if that window is wider.
Yeah.
Then,
and why is that, right?
Yeah.
Then we really this is the hard work.
Yeah.
Then we have to dig in and say, you know, is that because of our cultural and systemic biases, are the institutional racism?
And it may even be as simple as the type of insurance. Like sometimes insurance slows things down. And if you don't have access to better insurance, which again can be systemic, you know, then.
Yeah, the insurance has been looked at. And again, I just don't have the research in front of me, but it's you know, this difference in outcomes, whether you look by ethnicity or, you know, race, is independent of those other factors, right? Like you can look and try to figure out which the factor is, but it's not just the insurance.
Sure. But I mean, when you're talking systemic isn't, you know, just one factor either.
No,
it's, you know, obviously multiple variables that can all be negative.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so I can, which is why I guess you would see a dramatic difference is because of multiple variables more so than just one. What is something that you did not expect to be? Well, I think you cheated on that last question because the question you answered was something that you didn't expect, something positive that you didn't expect, which is going into surgery. What I asked was, what was something that surprised you that didn't work out? And that's why I accepted.
Yeah, he accepted my cheat answer.
Yeah. I accepted, but I also accepted the divorce because no one expects the Spanish Inquisition.
No one expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Also, I'm not picking on you. I asked this
No,
question a lot.
I know. What is something that I thought would work out differently?
Or that didn't work out at all, that you, in your head, you know, you're like, this is, I know where this is going. Somebody lives a charmed life.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's right. Everything's perfect, Zach. My life is perfect.
Everything is awesome.
I mean, I think it's probably back on the relationship front. You know, I think that like you in college, even, right? Like from a young age, I just wanted to be partnered, right? I wanted to have that person who, you know, like we were on the same page going through life together. And that was the person that you built a shared home base with. Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Or was?
Well,
Or
I mean,
it still is.
Still is.
I will, without getting too into the weeds in your personal life, I will say it still is.
Yeah. I think, why am I single? This is going to be on the podcast for everybody to listen to. Why am I single?
No, that's not what I asked. You just asked that question for some reason, which was not at all what we were talking about. What we were talking about was, why do you think that you wanted that so bad?
Why do I think I wanted to be partnered? I think because I didn't feel that solid home base from my family.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
You know, for all of the reasons that it just didn't exist, you know, and I think certainly my mom tried to create it for me, but then she got sick. It's not really something that she could do. But yeah, I think, you know, I wanted, and maybe because I wanted guidance, right? Like maybe I figured out the medical career part of it, but I don't know that I figured out some of the other things about like what direction I wanted my life to go in, and, you know, was looking for somebody to help give me direction.
Did you find that being as driven as you were made romantic relationships more difficult?
Maybe that's what they found. I mean, I think I was just me.
You are 100% responsible for your 50%, Lily.
I think yes, because maybe you have less energy. I think, you know, part of it was it takes the focus off, which might be good or might be bad, right? Like, because I mean, when I was when I was a medical student, and especially when I was a surgery resident, I mean, I was working 80 plus hours a week.
Sure.
Like, it doesn't give a whole lot of time for other things. And I was focused on that, and it was a priority for me.
So one of the things that I think about, though, is you weren't super datey. Like, you didn't date a bunch. So that's why I wondered if the being driven was like, I'm focused on this one. I want this thing, but I'm focused on this thing. So I'm not, you know.
But I mean,
like,
I don't know if you remember, but I dated the same guy for like 2 years. The second half of college, I was in a relationship.
Yeah, he doesn't count.
The whole time. Mike, he was so good to me. But I think it, you know, I think that my being driven made it hard because I had then a career path, and that led me to move to a different city.
Right.
And yeah, you know, I definitely took some of the focus off of that. And yeah.
It's weird because like I vaguely remember that, and there has to be a reason why it's vaguely remember. But I think ultimately what it was for me from the outside looking in, I was like, yeah, this isn't gonna be the thing. Like, this one isn't gonna be the thing.
Yeah.
And that's why. But like prior to that, you weren't like Taylor Swift in it through life. Like, you weren't like hopping from relationship to relationship. You weren't, you know. So it's interesting for me to hear you say that's something that you wanted so badly. But I mean, maybe it was just that you were choosy.
Yeah.
You know, which more people probably should be.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like, you know, that time I was doing just the opposite.
Yes. Well, yes. And to be fair to Taylor Swift, I wouldn't compare your dating in college to her public persona dating.
Well, I mean, I'm not a billionaire. I'm not a musical genius. I would even argue, without getting, again, too far in the weeds on Taylor Swift, she's a prodigy. That girl is a genius.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't know that if I didn't have a daughter who's obsessed with her and a wife who's obsessed with her. But sitting down and listening to her music blows my fucking mind. It is so smart that it makes me angry. Also, I said the other day that I'm so glad I did not date any singer-songwriters in college, because apparently
there would be some songs about you that would not be easy to listen to.
I just heard what is it called? Not the shortest man the smallest man in the world. And apparently you can straight up murder somebody with a song because it is brutal. Like, she ended that man's life with that song. Like, I know he's still around, but he might as well not be, because oh my. And I'm just like, oh God, all it would have taken was like one semi-talented lyricist to end me. I mean, it was bad enough when that one dude put those pictures up all over of me, but like, it's just you don't remember that?
That is like very vague in the back of my memory.
When I got beat up?
Yeah.
I got beat up by that girl?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he put pictures up around the campus that said that I beat up women. And I was like, dude, you are very confused on how that went down, because I still have a fat lip.
Are you glad that we didn't live in the era of social media, though?
Oh, buddy, yeah. I mean, yeah. I was just going to say something incredibly misogynistic, but I stopped myself. But yeah, no, that would have been bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it was bad enough that we had like AOL and stuff. Like, that was risky enough.
Yeah. You were on AOL.
Oh, yeah. 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 Strangely, I actually had serious girlfriends that I met on like AOL and Semester that I dated for quite a while. But or even like Tinder or any of that would have been a disaster.
Well, I think it's hard because there's just so much less sort of anonymity.
Oh yeah.
Which is there's some positives about that, but there's also just so much coming at you. This is one of the things that I talked before about, you know, some of the challenges in my work, the email, and I don't think it's just my work. I think it's everybody's work. It's like, you know, there's so many emails. And then depending on where you work, there might also be a Teams channel, or there might be 5 Teams channels, or there might be, you know, somebody trying to contact you on, you know, your text message, and somebody also trying to contact you on, you know, some other messaging service. I used to do a lot of the organizational work that I do on Google drive.
Mhm.
And then the university decided it wasn't a safe product to have.
Oh, like
I
wasn't
have
secure enough?
no like conflict of interest or stake in any IT software. But yeah, so then we didn't have it. And then you're like, well, I have to do this like committee project and I don't have access to it at my work computer,
Right.
Yeah.
My biggest challenge was at one point I was in IT and I would get my emails to my phone.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was terrible at is I assumed that because I received that email, that was someone going, right now, I want you to answer this question right now.
Yeah.
And all it was them going, I thought of this question right now. Like,
Yeah.
you can answer it when you get to work on Monday. But in my head, I was like, these assholes. Don't they know to leave me? They're not calling you, Zach.
Yeah.
They're not showing up at your door.
No, but I think there's like some cultural challenge, right? Like workplace culture that you have to learn. Or there are some workplace cultures that are like, no, I do expect you to answer that, at like Saturday morning at 6 a.m.
Which is how it is now, which is why I don't get emails on my phone anymore.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I don't get paid to do anything on. See, I can choose not to be on call.
Yeah. There you go.
So yeah, and I could see where that would be challenging. And like my therapist texted me one day, and I'm like, he must trust me because I now have his phone number, like his cell phone number. And so I told him that I hope he enjoys all of the services I signed him up for. But it's like.
What happens when you have a comic as a client.
Yeah, pretty much. I was like, I'm gonna mess with you, Bob. I mean, he's the second longest relationship I've ever had. So I mean, what but I can't imagine having that type of job and putting yourself. I mean, seriously, all jokes aside, he must trust me to not bother him because, like, God, geez, if I was one of his, I mean, I'm neurotic. If I was one of his more neurotic patients, I can only imagine how much his phone would blow up. It's like, oh God, I had a dream about a unicorn and I think it means my mom hates me. And then he's got to talk to him about it. It's like whole thing.
You have a vivid imagination.
I try.
Zach, yes, you do.
It's one of the few things that I have left. I cannot stress enough how thankful I am that you were willing to sit down and talk to me. I mean, for the last 20 plus years.
For the last 24 years.
But I thank you for being vulnerable and candid and talking to us about everything. I think it's important for people to know that they're not alone. And my way of doing that is trying to bring in as many different types of people to tell their stories so that other people understand like that people are going through it too, whatever that it is. So I think you have done a tremendous service for the 6 people that listen to this.
Yeah.
But no, I can't ever just do it. I can't ever just say the nice thing. I have to put something else pithy in there. I think you have done a tremendous service with this conversation of showing people how even someone who is massively successful, incredibly accomplished, good mom, and just a good person also has had some adversity and has come out of the end of it doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And because I wasn't a good enough friend to do it before when we were younger, I'm very proud of you. And I love you. And you're doing a great job. Okay.
I love you. And I hope that, that people who listen, who need to hear it, will know that there's always somebody there that you can reach out to. And I have just been so blessed at how many people are out there supporting me, and I have learned over the last however many years that I've been working on being more vulnerable that I just have to lean in and let them do it.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully remember to give back to them too. But that if you are having a struggle, there is somebody there. And it feels big in the moment. And I talk to my kids about this all the time, right? This thing feels so big.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it is big. I don't want to dismiss that it's, a big thing. But whatever this is that feels big in the moment, with help, you can get through to the next moment. And it's not going to stop you from having the good things in life. It's, not all the moments are going to be good, but there are a lot of good things out there. So when you need somebody, that lean in, ask somebody to show up for you.
Yeah. then that's big because there's so much stigma to asking for help.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with it. Just say, hey, I'm having a day.
Yeah.
Like I need somebody.
Zach will get the thing off the top shelf if you ask him enough times.
Yeah,
Just for the
because I have
record.
tall friends that I will be like, hey,
He will
man.
get the stepladder.
my youngest son's 6'4". I'll just call him. He owes me. And he's a paramedic. So if you happen to fall, he can help you with that.
He can
too.
also help you with that.
As opposed to Lily, who's a surgeon, and will just laugh at you if you fall in her house down the stairs. Just saying. Hypothetically, if that would have happened before we started recording. Medical professional, ladies and gentlemen. I think there's an oath that she might have.
I did make sure that he was alive and breathing. And I wasn't sure if your ego would be more or less bruised if you needed me to help you up. So I waited for you to ask.
I mean, at this age, I just assume that people will help me up. I thought that was part of the thing.
People don't know the thoughts inside your head, Zach.
Yeah, but I think there was a comic that once said that once you get from the age of, oh, he fell, it's so funny, to, oh no, then people should be helping you
But aren't
up.
you happy that you're still in the it's so funny age?
It's just because we're the same age. I guarantee you there's people at the retirement home laughing their asses off at somebody having a straight out heart attack. They're like, look at him, he's clutching his chest. It's hilarious.
Somebody give that guy an aspirin, please.
Yeah, just a baby one, though. Let's not get crazy. We don't want to ruin his liver. Like, come on.
Oh.
Thank you so much for this. It was amazing.
Hmm.
You're amazing. Your kids are amazing. Your house is amazing. And your dog's my new best friend.
Yeah. Don't forget about the cat. She's still kicking it.
She can't hear me. She's probably deaf. I'm not going to hurt her feelings. That cat's going to outlive me.
She's trying.
This has been another episode of Those Who Do the Podcast with our guest, Lily Erdahl. With you as always, I'm Zach. Love you.
Tony Forsmark.
I need a promo to show what the podcast is about.
Brown pop.
We're going to be chatting to guests who've overcome adversity, people who have achieved greatness.
And then there's us.
He's about to tell me the worst news ever. And he said, really sorry, there's been a 22-car pileup. Everyone's dead except one person.
I want to know the Randy Spelling story.
My childhood was incredible.
My dad at 7 years old being called the F slur.
What a piece of shit, as you said.
What a piece of
Why are there balloons up on the screen?
Is there balloons on our screen?
What kind of show is this?
Yeah, that's right. But everybody will have a story.
Everybody.
The Brown Pipe Podcast is out now. Get it wherever you get your podcasts.